Khamzat Chimaev's middleweight takeover explained. There's a fighter so dangerous that even seasoned UFC veterans refuse to train with him. A man who's never lost a round in professional MMA, who ragdolled former welterweight champions like they were children, and who just became the most feared middleweight on the planet without even winning the belt yet. His name is Khamzat Chimaev, and he's about to change everything we thought we knew about combat sports dominance. When Khamzat Boz Chimaev stepped into the octagon for the first time in 2020, nobody could have predicted that this unknown fighter from Chechnya would become the most talked about name in mixed martial arts. But here we are, 4 years later, and Chimaev has done something that seemed impossible in the modern UFC era. He's created genuine fear among elite fighters. Today, we're diving deep into the phenomenon that is Khamzat Chimaev's rise to middleweight supremacy. We'll explore how a refugee who started training at 18 became the most dominant force in 2 weight classes, why his fighting style breaks every conventional rule of MMA, and what his ascension means for the future of the middleweight division. This isn't just another fighter analysis. This is the story of how one man's relentless pursuit of violence has rewritten the playbook on what it means to be unstoppable. Section 1. The making of a monster. The Chechen connection. To understand Khamzat Chimaev, you have to understand where he comes from. Born in Grozny, Chechnya in 1994, Chimaev grew up in a region that has been synonymous with warfare for decades. The Chechen wars of the 1990s and early 2000s created a generation of people who understood violence not as entertainment, but as survival. When Chimaev's family fled to Sweden as refugees when he was just 19, he carried with him something that can't be taught in any gym: the mentality of someone who has seen real conflict. This isn't romanticizing war. It's understanding that Chimaev's relationship with violence is fundamentally different from fighters who grew up in peaceful suburbs. In Chechnya, you fight or you die, Chimaev once said in an interview. In the cage, it's the same thing for me. The late start that became an advantage. Here's where Chimaev's story gets interesting from a technical standpoint. Most elite MMA fighters start training in their early teens, spending years developing muscle memory and technique. Chimaev didn't start serious MMA training until he was 18. Ancient by modern standards, but this late start might have been his secret weapon. Sports science research shows that athletes who specialize later often develop better problem-solving abilities and adaptability. They don't get locked into rigid movement patterns. When you watch Chimaev fight, you see this in action. He doesn't fight like someone who's been drilled in traditional techniques. He fights like someone who learned to solve problems with violence. His wrestling coach at All Stars Training Center in Stockholm, Andreas Michael, noticed this immediately. Khamzat doesn't think about technique the way other fighters do. He thinks about results. How do I get this person to the ground? How do I make them stop moving? It's very pure. The numbers don't lie. Let's talk statistics, because Chimaev's numbers are genuinely unprecedented in modern MMA. 10 professional fights, 10 wins, 0 losses, 6 finishes in the first round. Average fight time, 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Total damage absorbed, virtually none. Rounds lost, 0, according to most scorecards. But here's the statistic that really tells the story. In his UFC debut against John Phillips, Chimaev absorbed 0 significant strikes. 0. Against a professional fighter who had been competing for over a decade. That's not just dominance, that's a different level of control. Section 2, the style that breaks rules. Wrestling that isn't wrestling. When analysts try to categorize Chimaev's fighting style, they usually start with wrestling. After all, he's a freestyle wrestling champion who represented Sweden internationally. But watching Chimaev wrestle is like watching someone speak a language that sounds familiar but follows completely different grammar rules. Traditional MMA wrestling is about control, position, and gradual advancement. Wrestlers like Kamaru Usman or Colby Covington use their wrestling to dictate pace, wear down opponents, and create opportunities for strikes or submissions. It's methodical, it's strategic, and it's effective. Chimaev's wrestling is about violence. Watch his fight against Kevin Holland, a dangerous striker with excellent takedown defense. Within seconds, Chimaev had not just taken Holland down, but had lifted him completely off the ground and slammed him with such force that Holland's corner was visibly concerned. This wasn't a takedown, it was a statement. He doesn't wrestle to control, explains former UFC heavyweight Josh Barnett. He wrestles to hurt. Every takedown is designed to cause damage, not just change position. That's why it's so effective. Fighters aren't prepared for that level of violence in the wrestling exchanges. The striking paradox. Here's where Chimaev becomes truly fascinating from a technical perspective. On paper, his striking shouldn't work at the highest level. He doesn't have the crisp boxing of Israel Adesanya or the Muay Thai mastery of Anderson Silva. His technique isn't textbook perfect, but effectiveness isn't always about perfection. Chimaev's striking works because it's unpredictable and because it's backed by the constant threat of his wrestling. When you're worried about being taken down and mauled, you can't commit fully to your striking defense. You're always thinking about the takedown, which means you're never fully present in the striking exchange. More importantly, Chimaev strikes like someone who isn't afraid of being hit back. Most fighters, even elite ones, have a self-preservation instinct that creates small hesitations in their offense. Chimaev doesn't seem to have this instinct. He throws strikes like someone who genuinely doesn't care about the consequences. The cardio question, the one criticism that has followed Chimaev throughout his career is his cardio. In his fight against Gilbert Burns, his toughest test to date, Chimaev visibly slowed in the later rounds. Critics pointed to this as evidence that he could be beaten by fighters who could survive his early onslaught. But this analysis misses something crucial. Chimaev's cardio issues aren't necessarily a weakness. They might be a feature, not a bug. Think about it this way. Chimaev fights at such an intense pace in the early rounds that most opponents are finished before cardio becomes a factor. His strategy seems to be to create such overwhelming pressure early that the fight doesn't reach the later rounds where his conditioning might become an issue. It's a high-risk, high-reward approach, but the statistics support it. In 10 professional fights, only 2 have gone past the second round. That's not an accident, that's a strategy. Section 3. The middleweight revolution. Why the move makes perfect sense. When Chimaev announced his intention to move up to middleweight, many analysts questioned the decision. He was undefeated at welterweight, had clear paths to title contention, and was already struggling with weight cuts at 170 pounds. But the move to middleweight isn't just about weight management. It's about legacy. The middleweight division has always been considered the most prestigious in MMA. It's the weight class of Anderson Silva, the division where legends are made. For a fighter like Chimaev, who clearly sees himself as destined for greatness, middleweight represents the ultimate test. More practically, the move solves several problems for Chimaev. Weight cutting. At 6 feet 2 inches with a massive frame, cutting to 170 was becoming increasingly difficult. Strength advantage. At middleweight, Chimaev maintains his strength advantage while facing less physically imposing opponents. Fresh matchups. The middleweight division offers new challenges and storylines. The current landscape. The middleweight division Chimaev is entering is in a state of flux. Current champion Sean Strickland is a solid but not spectacular title holder. Former champion Israel Adesanya is coming off a loss and looking to rebuild. Contenders like Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa, and Marvin Vettori all have question marks. Into this uncertainty steps Chimaev, a fighter who brings something none of these men possess, the aura of inevitability. When you watch Chimaev fight, you don't wonder if he'll win. You wonder how quickly he'll win. That's a psychological advantage that can't be quantified but is absolutely real. The stylistic matchups. Let's break down how Chimaev matches up against the current middleweight elite versus Sean Strickland. Strickland is a volume striker who relies on pressure and cardio. Against Chimaev's wrestling and early aggression, this becomes a nightmare matchup for the champion. Versus Israel Adesanya. This is the most intriguing matchup. Adesanya's length and striking precision could give Chimaev problems, but Adesanya has shown vulnerability to aggressive wrestlers. See Alex Pereira, Jan Blachowicz. Versus Robert Whittaker. Whittaker's well-rounded game and experience could make this competitive, but he struggles against powerful wrestlers. Yoel Romero, Khamzat's teammate, suggests Chimaev would be favored. Versus Paulo Costa, a pure power versus power matchup that would likely end quickly one way or another. Section 4. The fear factor. When fighters don't want to fight. There's something unprecedented happening in the UFC, and it centers around Khamzat Chimaev. For the first time in recent memory, we're seeing established fighters actively avoid fighting someone. Leon Edwards, the former welterweight champion, was notably reluctant to face Chimaev. Colby Covington has made excuses to avoid the matchup. Even at middleweight, fighters seem hesitant to call out the Chechen-Swedish destroyer. This isn't normal. In the UFC, fighters typically campaign for big fights, especially against undefeated prospects. The fact that established names are avoiding Chimaev tells us something important about his reputation behind the scenes. Fighters know, says veteran MMA journalist Ariel Helwani. They watch the tape, they hear the stories from training partners, and they know this isn't just another prospect. This is someone who could end careers. The training partner stories. The stories that come out of Chimaev's training camps are the stuff of legend. Multiple sources have reported that sparring partners regularly refuse to continue sessions with him. Not because he's dirty or dangerous, but because the intensity is simply too much for most people to handle. One story, reported by several MMA journalists, involves a training session where Chimaev was supposed to work light technical sparring with a training partner. Within minutes, the session had escalated to what witnesses described as basically a real fight. The training partner, a professional fighter himself, had to be pulled away and refused to continue. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern that suggests Chimaev operates at a level of intensity that most fighters simply can't match. The psychological warfare. What makes Chimaev truly dangerous isn't just his physical skills. It's the psychological impact he has on opponents before they even enter the cage. Sports psychology research shows that confidence and belief are crucial factors in athletic performance. When a fighter steps into the cage, already believing they're going to lose, they've lost a significant portion of their effectiveness. Chimaev's aura of invincibility creates exactly this scenario. Opponents spend their training camps not just preparing for his techniques, but dealing with the mental pressure of facing someone who has never lost, never really been hurt, and never shown weakness. It's like fighting a myth, says former UFC fighter Kenny Florian. How do you prepare for someone who doesn't seem human? Section 5. The business of being unstoppable. The Dana White factor. UFC. President Dana White has seen a lot of fighters come and go, but his reaction to Chimaev has been notably different. White has fast-tracked Chimaev's career in a way that's almost unprecedented, giving him increasingly high-profile fights and main event slots despite his relatively short UFC tenure. This isn't just about talent, it's about business. Chimaev represents something the UFC desperately needs, a genuine superstar in the making. In an era where many fighters struggle to capture mainstream attention, Chimaev's combination of dominance and personality makes him a marketing dream. The numbers support this. Chimaev's fights consistently draw higher viewership numbers than other fighters at his level. His social media engagement is through the roof. He's becoming a draw, and in the fight business, draws are everything. The international appeal. Chimaev's background gives him appeal in multiple markets that are crucial to the UFC's global expansion. He represents Sweden in international competition, giving him Scandinavian appeal. His Chechen heritage connects him to the massive Russian Eastern European MMA fan base. His Muslim faith opens doors in Middle Eastern markets. This international appeal is worth millions to the UFC. In a sport that's increasingly global, having fighters who can draw in multiple markets is invaluable. The risk and reward. But there's a risk in building someone up as unstoppable. Eventually, everyone loses. The question for the UFC is whether Chimaev can capture a title and establish himself as a legitimate superstar before that inevitable first loss comes. The smart money says yes. Chimaev's combination of skills, mentality, and marketing appeal suggests he's not just another prospect. He's the future of the sport. The unstoppable force meets what? Here's the central question that defines Khamzat Chimaev's career. What happens when an unstoppable force meets, well, what exactly? In physics, the classic paradox asks what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. But in Chimaev's case, we haven't found the immovable object yet. Every opponent has been moved, dominated, and often finished. This creates a fascinating scenario in the middleweight division. We have a fighter who has never truly been tested, operating at the highest level of the sport. It's unprecedented in modern MMA to have someone with Chimaev's level of dominance facing elite competition. The revelation isn't just that Chimaev is good. It's that he might represent an evolution in what a mixed martial artist can be. He's not just combining different martial arts, he's combining them with a level of intensity and violence that we haven't seen before at the highest levels. The historical context. To understand how rare Chimaev's dominance is, we need to look at MMA history. Even the greatest fighters of all time had moments of vulnerability early in their careers. Anderson Silva was submitted by Ryo Chonen and Daiju Takase. John Jones struggled with Vitor Belfort and Alexander Gustafsson. Fedor Emelianenko had competitive fights with Mirko Cro Cop Filipovic. Georges St-Pierre lost to Matt Hughes and Matt Serra. Chimaev hasn't had that moment yet. He hasn't been hurt, hasn't been in serious trouble, hasn't shown the vulnerability that makes fighters human. This isn't to say he's invincible. No fighter is. But it does suggest that when his first real test comes, it's going to be seismic for the sport. Khamzat Chimaev's rise to middleweight prominence isn't just another success story in MMA. It's a paradigm shift. He represents a new breed of fighter, one who combines elite-level skills with an intensity that borders on the supernatural. As he prepares to make his mark on the middleweight division, we're witnessing something special. This isn't just about titles or rankings. It's about watching someone redefine what's possible in combat sports. The question isn't whether Chimaev will become middleweight champion. The question is how long it will take and who, if anyone, can stop him. For fans of combat sports, we're living through a historic moment.
We're watching the emergence of a fighter who might be remembered alongside the greatest names in MMA history.
The only question is whether we'll look back on this era as the time when Khamzat Chimaev conquered the world, or as the calm before someone finally figured out how to stop the unstoppable. What do you think? Is Chimaev truly unstoppable? Or is there someone in the middleweight division who has the tools to solve the puzzle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Fighting Explained for more deep dives into the world of combat sports. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss our upcoming breakdown of the middleweight division's most dangerous contenders and how they stack up against the Boars himself. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Chimaev's dominance, check out our video on why modern MMA has never seen anything like Khamzat Chimaev, where we explore the technical breakdown of his most devastating finishes and what makes his fighting style so uniquely terrifying. The era of Khamzat Chimaev is just beginning, and we'll be here to explain every devastating moment of it. Until next time, keep fighting, keep learning, and keep watching Fighting Explained, your home for the deepest analysis in combat sports.